September 24th, 1983. FC Barcelona were traveling to Bilbao to face Athletic Club at San Mamés, and within minutes of the opening whistle, a single challenge on the field would leave Diego Maradona on the ground with a fracture in his left ankle that would keep him out of football for 3.5 months. He was 22 years old. At the time, there was no certainty about how fully he would recover or whether the ankle would ever allow him to play at the same level again. That the incident became one of the most discussed fouls in Spanish football history was not only because of what it did to Maradona's body. It was also because of who committed it, how it happened, and the broader context of the match, a context that had been building for more than a year. Maradona had arrived in Barcelona in the summer of 1982. The transfer fee was approximately $7.5 million, a world record at the time, and the expectations attached to it were correspondingly large. Barcelona had not won the Spanish league since 1974. The board and the supporters had decided that Maradona was the player who could change the club's standing in the competition, and his first season had done enough to sustain that belief, even as Barcelona fell short of the title. Spanish football in that period was physically demanding in ways that went beyond the normal contact of the game. Defenders were permitted a level of aggression that the modern game has largely eliminated. A forward who could be slowed down, unsettled, or simply hurt badly enough to become less effective over the course of a match was a problem that many defenses resolved through direct physical means. Maradona, because of how he played, low center of gravity, close ball control, constant movement in tight spaces, was particularly exposed to that kind of attention. He was also, in nearly every match, the player the opposing team most needed to stop. Athletic Club of Bilbao had one of the more physical defenses in the Spanish league. Their defenders were organized, committed, and willing to make their presence felt early in a match. San Mamés, their stadium in Bilbao, was a tight, loud venue where the crowd sat close to the touchlines, and the atmosphere for visiting teams was consistently difficult. Barcelona had been there before. Maradona had played in those conditions before. On this particular Sunday in September, the match carried an added edge. Barcelona and Athletic had met frequently in recent seasons, and the pattern of those games had established a clear dynamic. Athletic's defenders would pursue Maradona throughout the 90 minutes, and Maradona would spend the match trying to find space against men who were specifically assigned to give him none. The game kicked off. The intensity was visible from the first minutes. Within a short time, the challenge came. The match moved quickly from the opening minutes. Athletic's midfielders pressed high, closing down Barcelona's passing options before they could develop, and when the ball did reach Maradona, there was almost always an Athletic player within a step of him. That was the pattern San Mamés had seen in previous meetings between these two clubs, and the early minutes of this game followed it closely. Approximately 14 minutes into the match, Maradona received the ball in midfield and moved forward. He had taken 2 or 3 steps when Andoni Goikoetxea arrived from behind him. Goikoetxea did not make contact with the ball. His right boot came down across the back of Maradona's left ankle with full force. The contact was direct and unimpeded. Maradona went down immediately and did not get up. What those inside San Mamés saw in the next few seconds was a player lying on the pitch, not moving, while the match around him stopped. Goikoetxea stepped back. The referee blew his whistle. Barcelona players reached Maradona within moments, and the way they gathered around him, the speed of their reaction, the expressions on their faces, suggested immediately that this was not an ordinary foul. Maradona remained on the ground while the Barcelona medical staff came onto the field. He did not attempt to stand. His left ankle had absorbed the full weight of Goikoetxea's challenge, and even in those early minutes, before any formal assessment had been made, it was clear to the players closest to him that something was seriously wrong. Goikoetxea received a yellow card. The decision drew immediate and visible anger from the Barcelona players on the field. Several of them moved toward the referee. The crowd at San Mamés, Athletic's home supporters, was loud throughout, and the noise continued even as Maradona was being attended to on the ground. The stadium atmosphere did not shift in the way it might have in a neutral venue. This was Bilbao's ground, and Athletic Bilbao's supporters remained present and vocal. Maradona was eventually carried from the field on a stretcher. He did not return. Barcelona played out the remainder of the match without him, and when it was over, the game's result was already secondary to the question of how badly Maradona had been hurt. Goikoetxea would later become permanently associated with this moment, his name in football circles rarely mentioned without reference to what happened on that September afternoon. At the time, the full consequences of the challenge were not yet known. The medical team that examined Maradona after the match would provide a clearer picture. What they found in the bones and ligaments of his left ankle would determine not only how long he would be absent from the game, but whether the ankle could carry the demands of professional football again. That examination was still to come. The medical examination after the match confirmed what the players on the field had suspected. Maradona had sustained a fracture of the left ankle, along with significant ligament damage. For a footballer whose game depended almost entirely on movement, close control, and rapid changes of direction, an injury of that kind carried consequences that went beyond the immediate recovery period. The ankle is not a joint that heals simply or quickly when both bone and soft tissue have been damaged together, and the doctors who examined Maradona made clear that his return to football was not a matter of weeks. The timeline they gave was 3.5 months, at minimum. Barcelona officials confirmed the diagnosis publicly within days of the match. The club had paid a world record fee to bring Maradona to Spain 17 months earlier, and now their central player would miss the heart of the season while the ankle healed. The reaction among the Barcelona squad was visible. Teammates who had been on the field at San Mamés had watched the challenge happen from close range, and several of them spoke afterward about what they had seen. The frustration inside the squad was not directed at the situation abstractly. It was directed at a specific player and a specific act. Spanish football media covered the incident extensively in the days that followed. The footage was reviewed, described, and debated in print and on radio. The challenge on Maradona had not been a collision or a misjudgment of timing. Goikoetxea had arrived late without contact with the ball, and the force of the challenge had been sufficient to fracture bone. That much was not disputed. The Spanish Football Federation imposed a suspension on Goikoetxea. The length of the ban, 18 matches, reflected the severity of the incident and was one of the longest suspensions given to a player in the Spanish league at that time. The disciplinary response did not settle the broader discussion. Critics argued the challenge was representative of a wider tolerance for dangerous play in the Spanish game. Others pointed to the way certain defenders in the league had been allowed, across many seasons, to physically neutralize technically superior opponents with minimal consequence. Goikoetxea himself kept the boots he had worn that day. Years later, he was reported to have them displayed at home. Maradona began his recovery. The months that followed were difficult for the club, and by his own later accounts, for him personally. He had come to Barcelona as the most expensive footballer in the world, and now he was sitting out matches, managing rehabilitation, and waiting to find out how much of his movement the ankle would give back. He did return. By the early months of 1984, he was back on the field for Barcelona, but the rivalry with Athletic Bilbao had not resolved itself. The two clubs would meet again, and Maradona would be on the field when they did. That match would not be calmer than the last one. The tackle had lasted a fraction of a second. The recovery from it took 3.5 months, and the uncertainty that surrounded those months, About the ankle, about how it would respond when Maradona returned to training, about whether it would hold up under the demands of competitive football, was not something that resolved cleanly the moment he was cleared to play again. Returning from a fracture and ligament damage is not simply a matter of waiting for bone to knit. The left ankle would have to carry cutting movements, rapid acceleration, the kind of close contact physicality that Maradona encountered in nearly every match he played. Doctors could confirm that the structure had healed. They could not confirm in advance how it would respond when tested at full speed against defenders who would not be making allowances for it. That question could only be answered on the field. Maradona returned to the Barcelona squad in the early weeks of 1984. His first matches back were measured, as early returns from serious injuries often are, cautious in the minutes he played, careful in the challenges he accepted. Over time, as the ankle demonstrated that it could take the load, he began to play with something closer to his previous level. But the season at Barcelona was not recovering well in other respects. The relationship between Maradona and the club's management had become difficult. His relationship with Johan Cruyff, who was involved in club affairs, was strained. The expectations that had arrived with his transfer fee had not been fully met, and the months spent injured had done nothing to ease the pressure. By the end of the 1983-84 season, it was becoming clear that his time at Barcelona was likely ending. He left for Napoli in Italy that summer for another world record fee. What followed, the 8 years in Naples, the 1986 World Cup in Mexico, the goals against England, is a different story. But it is a story that might have unfolded very differently if the ankle at San Mamés had not healed as it did, or if the fracture had been more severe, or if the ligament damage had left behind the kind of chronic instability that ends careers quietly, through accumulation rather than a single incident. Andoni Goikoetxea played in Spanish football for several more years. His name did not fade from the conversation about that day in September 1983. In some corners of the game, it never has. The match itself lasted 90 minutes. The tackle lasted less than one. Maradona went on to become what he became. The 1986 World Cup, the goals, the years at Napoli that turned a city into something that resembled devotion. But for a few months in the winter of 1983, none of that was certain.